Hello, my name's Kala and I'm with Mission Citizen, and today I'm going to be teaching Lesson 7, which is on American history. So, as always, if you have not done so already, just go ahead and go to the Mission Citizen website, so www.missioncitizen.org. Go to the Student Resources tab, scroll down to Lesson 7, and then print out the quiz from Lesson 6 and the note sheet for Lesson 7, and then just fill out that quiz based on either your notes from Lesson 6 or your memory or just knowledge you already have. And then once you have done that, you can unpause this video and I will get into the answers to those questions. Okay, so assuming you've paused, done your quiz, and now are ready to look at the answers, I'm just going to move forward. So for question number 1, an amendment is an addition / a change to the Constitution. Either of those. For question number 2, there are 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. For question number 3, the first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. For question number 4, one right the First Amendment grants is the right to freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, or freedom of press. For question number 5, freedom of religion means that all people have the right to practice or not practice any religion. Moving on to question number 6. So in this one, you can describe any one of the voting amendments. So if you chose the 15th Amendment, you would say that it states that the right to vote cannot be denied based on race. If you chose the 19th Amendment, that would say the right to vote cannot be denied based on sex. If you choose the 24th Amendment, you would say you don't have to pay a poll tax to vote. And you could also say the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18 years old. Oops, sorry. Okay, so on to question number 7. Susan B. Anthony fought for women's rights or civil rights. You could also say women's right to vote, as long as you're getting across the same meaning of what Susan B. Anthony's main mission was. For question number 8, the civil rights movement tried to end racial discrimination. And moving forward to question number 9, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. fought for equality for all Americans, or you could say civil rights. For question number 10, 2 rights for everyone in the U.S. are freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of petition, or the right to bear arms. Any 2 of those rights. 1 right for only U.S. citizens is the right to vote in federal elections or run for federal office. Either one of those. 1 responsibility of U.S. citizens is voting or serving on a jury. And if you want to make those 2 easier for yourself, you can just go ahead and pick voting in federal elections for both of those answers. For question number 13, Americans can participate in democracy by voting, joining a political party, helping a campaign, joining a community group or civic group, giving an elected official your opinion, calling your representatives, publicly supporting or opposing an issue, running for office, or writing to a newspaper. Any of those will work for this answer. And then we have the 2 major political parties in the U.S. are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And just remember, although there are some other political parties in the U.S., these 2 are the only ones that will work for this question about the 2 main political parties. Okay, and then our final question, number 15. 1 promise you make when you become a citizen is to give up loyalty to other countries, defend the Constitution and laws of the United States, obey the laws of the United States, serve in the military if needed, serve the nation if needed, or be loyal to the United States. Any of those promises. Okay, so now that we have gone through our quiz, we are going to get into the new information for this class. So we're doing American history and we're going to start with the 1800s. So now you're going to want to make sure you have your note sheet out, and as always you're taking notes on the information in the bold. So just fill in the blanks with the information on the slideshows that is in bold. Okay, so we're going to start with the Louisiana Purchase. So in 1803, beginning of the century, the U.S. purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. So if you know what Louisiana looks like today, it's this state down here. It's fairly small, but the Louisiana Territory was actually a much, much bigger territory that contained parts of 14 U.S. states and even a little bit of Canada up here that you can see. So this purchase was a very large and expensive at the time purchase, and it doubled the size of the U.S. approximately. So it was a huge expansion of the territory that the U.S. contains currently. Okay, so there were some wars fought by the U.S. in the 1800s. You'll notice that is a trend of all of the centuries of the U.S. There are some wars that are fought. So 4 of those wars include the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, and the Spanish-American War. So when deciding which of these to remember for your test, if you have trouble remembering which century which war goes in, I would just go ahead and remember the War of 1812 because you can't go wrong. If you know the name of that war, you know the century it happened in. Or you could go with the Civil War because that is a really key part of our history, happened in the mid-1800s. Whatever's easiest for you to remember. Okay, so we're going to go in a little bit of depth on each of these wars. So the War of 1812 happened between 1812 and 1815. And in that war, Britain was trying to regain control over the Americas after the U.S. gained independence by restricting trade. So this, paired with some other factors like Americans' desire to expand into more territory, ultimately led to a war between Britain and the U.S., another war. And it ended in 1815 at a stalemate. Neither side won. And an interesting fact about this war, it is the only time that the White House ever burned down. That was a casualty of this war. Okay, so the next war in the 1800s is the Mexican-American War. So this occurred from 1846 to 1848. It was a 2-year war. And the reason for the Mexican-American War was that, again, the U.S. wanted to expand, this time into southwestern territory belonging to Mexico. And of course, countries don't generally like when you take their territory, so this led to war with Mexico. And the U.S. ultimately won the war and took control of present-day U.S. states California, Utah, Nevada, and New Mexico over here. So that also pretty drastically increased the size of the United States. Next war we have is the Civil War. So the Civil War was fought between the north of the United States, then called the Union, and the south of the United States, which was called the Confederacy. And the Civil War began after southern states whose economy and entire way of life was built on slavery left the United States. So they did what's called, they seceded. So they decided to no longer be a part of the country due to tension with the northern states whose economies were not built on slavery and which did not have slavery as a legalized practice. So when explaining what the Civil War was fought over, the key points are really slavery is the big one, and then you could also say it was due to economics because Southern economy was built on slavery, the Northern economy was not. Or you could say it was fought over states' rights. So Southern states wanted the right to practice slavery without the federal government intervening in that. So there was a conflict there. But really, all of those answers boil down to slavery. That's the most common, the main reason why the Civil War was fought. Okay, so a key figure in the Civil War was Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln was president the same time frame as the Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and he led the United States during the Civil War and ultimately preserved the Union as one nation, even though the southern states wanted to split it off into their own new nation at the time. And in 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves in the Confederate South. So Lincoln is often credited with abolishing slavery or freeing the slaves, and it is true that he signed the document that that officially abolished slavery, but it is also important to note that many other figures in history, such as Frederick Douglass and other historical figures, were really the ones pushing for an end to slavery, and Abraham Lincoln's decision making behind the Emancipation Proclamation had a lot to do with uniting the country and ending the war, as opposed to an actual desire to end slavery. He was not what is called an abolitionist, which was the group of people who were really opposed to slavery. Okay, moving on to the Spanish-American War. This one is animated. Look at this. Okay, so in the Spanish-American War, which was just 1 year, 1898 is the year that happened, so the U.S. intervened to try to help Cuba gain independence from Spain, which had colonized Cuba. This ultimately led to war with Spain. The war was very brief. It lasted less than 4 months. The U.S. defeated Spain fairly quickly. And then after that, the U.S. became a powerful influence over Cuba. So the U.S. kind of replaced the role of Spain in intervening in Cuba. So that's the final war of the 1800s. Okay, so now we're just going to go over these questions we just learned, as always, in a little quiz format. If you know the answer, shout it out, write it down, come up with it in your head, whatever you want to do. So just go ahead when I read it. Think of the answer, say the answer, write the answer, whatever you want. Okay, name one war fought by the United States in the 1800s. You could say the War of 1812. You could say the Mexican-American War, the Civil War, or the Spanish-American War. What territory did the United States buy from France in 1803? If you said the Louisiana Territory, or you could also just say Louisiana, but I would really try to say Louisiana Territory, so it's distinct from the state, but that is the correct answer. What was the war between the North and South of the United States? The answer to this one is the Civil War. Okay, name one problem that led to the Civil War. You could say slavery. You could say economic reasons. You could also say states' rights. Any of those answers work. Okay, what was one important thing Abraham Lincoln did? Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, so that's the Emancipation Proclamation. You could also say he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. You could say he saved or preserved the Union, or you could say he led the United States during the Civil War. Oops. Okay, so any of those three answers will be good. Now we're going to get into the 1900s and the history of America in that century. Okay, so wars in the 1900s. We fought one more war in the 1900s than in the 1800s, so 5 wars. First, we fought World War I, then World War II, then the Korean War, then the Vietnam War, then the Persian Gulf War, or that's sometimes also just referred to as the Gulf War. Okay, so World War I, we're just going to go into a little bit more detail about each of them once again. So World War I started in Europe due to various conflicts between countries, pretty complicated conflicts. There's a lot of different views on why the war started, but there was a series of events. War started in Europe. Ultimately, America entered the war in 1917 after an American ship was bombed by the German. And then the U.S. president during that time was Woodrow Wilson, so he led America into war. And then by the end of the war, America and its allies had defeated Germany, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire and won World War I. Okay, so following World War I, so by 1929, the stock market crashed and there was a severe international economic downturn called the Great Depression. So in America, millions of people lost their jobs and were forced into poverty. This is on my right, is a really famous picture that kind of captures the poverty and stress and just anxiety of the time due to the economy. So during the Great Depression, Franklin D. Roosevelt, sometimes called FDR, was the president, and he would also be president throughout World War II as well. So the U.S. entered World War II in 1941 after the Japanese attacked a U.S. military base, U.S. naval base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And so America and its allies ultimately, by the end of the war, defeated Germany, Japan, and Italy, which were then fascist countries under fascist rulers, in 1945. And then throughout World War II, Dwight Eisenhower was a general, and he would also later become a U.S. president. Okay, so on to the Cold War. The U.S. fought the Cold War against the Soviet Union over communism. So there was a conflict between Americans' belief in capitalism and the Soviet Union's practice of communism. So although the U.S. and the Soviet Union never actually battled in a physical war, they both supported wars in other countries that were called proxy wars. So the US would support democratic governments while the Soviet Union would support communist governments. So it often appeared like there were these smaller local conflicts, but ultimately America and the Soviet Union were playing a big role in all of those smaller conflicts, which is why we say that there was a Cold War between America and the Soviet Union. And the reason it's called a Cold War is because a war where there's physical fighting is a hot war, like gunfire, and in a Cold War, there is no actual fighting between the two sides. Like the gunfire is cold, you could say. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the proxy wars that were fought during the Cold War. So there were these are two of them. There were multiple various proxy wars fought during the Cold War, but two of them are the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So the Korean War lasted 3 years. It occurred from 1950 to 1953, and it was fought between the communist North Korean government and the democratic South Korean government. So the US was backing the South, while the Soviet Union was backing the North, and they were fighting for control of Korea. And then there was also the Vietnam War, which lasted for 20 years from 1955 to 1975. And that was a conflict between the communist North Vietnamese government and the democratic South Vietnamese government. And again, you had the Soviet Union supporting the communist North and the United States supporting the the South, the capitalist South, democratic capitalist South. Okay, so those are the proxy wars. Now, this is not a war, but it is another important event in US history, and that is the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So on September 11th, 2001, Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked the US. So they were radical Islamist terrorists from various countries in the Middle East that attacked the US. So they hijacked planes and crashed them into the World Trade Center, which is also known as the Twin Towers. You can see in that picture right there in New York City. And then they also crashed planes into the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, where a lot of high-level federal government officials work. So this was the first successful terrorist attack on US soil since the War of 1812. It was a really big deal for the country. It created a lot of fear in America, and it led to a lot of shifts in American culture and politics. So 9/11 ultimately was a catalyst for two wars that the US fought in the Middle East, in Afghanistan and Iraq. Countless people died in those wars, both Americans and people in those countries. And it also led to a lot of kind of government surveillance and infringements on privacy, because people were just really worried about the possibility of a second terrorist attack. So the government became much more active in monitoring things like phone calls of ordinary Americans. Okay, so that is 9/11. So now we're going to get back into a quiz. Again, just call it out, write it down, think of the answer if you know it. Name one war fought by the United States in the 1900s. You could say World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, or you could just call it the Gulf War. Any of those are good answers. World War I and II are probably the easiest to remember. Very consequential, deadly wars. Okay, who was president during World War I? President during World War I was Woodrow Wilson, and you would still get that one correct if you just said Wilson. Who did the United States fight in World War II? Japan, Germany, and Italy, known as the Axis powers. Japan, Germany, and Italy. Who was president during the Great Depression and World War II? Franklin Roosevelt, also called FDR. And you could just say Roosevelt for this answer, and they would most likely give you that correct at your interview, but there is another US president, Teddy Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. So I would try to remember that whole name, Franklin Roosevelt, so it's very clear that you know who you're talking about. Okay, before he was president, Eisenhower was a general. What war was he in? Eisenhower was in World War II. During the Cold War, what was the main concern of the United States? The United States was concerned with communism. What major event happened on September 11th, 2001 in the United States? Terrorists attacked the United States. And you can also say something a little bit more detailed, like terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon of the United States. You could say Al Qaeda terrorists attacked the United States. You could say terrorists hijacked planes and flew them into United States buildings. Those are all just more specific ways of saying this meaning. But this answer, terrorists attacked the United States, is completely fine. Okay, so now that we have reached the end of our new information on this exciting lesson in American history, now we have a citizen tip for you all. So our tip this week is volunteer for a political campaign. So volunteering with a political campaign is a really great way to get involved and to make an impact on elections that ultimately have a really big influence on the policies that get enacted and the laws that we live with in our daily lives. So, if you are interested in volunteering for a political campaign, the first step is to find a candidate whose campaign you believe in. You can do this by reading the news, watching the news, or just researching on the internet to find a candidate whose message really resonates with you and who you believe would be a good leader. So then once you've done that, you should find the candidate's campaign website. You can just type their name into Google and you should find it right away. There will usually on their website be a page that says volunteer. So you can just press that and then it'll probably take you to like a form that you fill out your email address and your name and things like that. And that's how you can get plugged into volunteering. And then they'll send you information. You could make calls, knock on doors, pass out flyers, register voters, attend or host events, and just generally spread the word about your candidate. And that is a great way to both ensure that people vote and also to help convince people to vote for the person you believe in. So that is a way you can have an impact on local politics, state politics, even national politics. And you can do it even before you gain your citizenship and before you can actually vote yourself. Okay, so that's our citizen tip of the week. Now, if you have any questions on the lesson, on American history, or anything else, feel free to email us at missioncitizen@gmail.com and we will get back to you as soon as we can. But thank you for listening. It has been a pleasure teaching you about American history. See you next time.